and pharmaceutical imports came from China in 2018, but that doesn't really capture the entire picture because China also produces some of the key ingredients that other countries use to manufacture things like antibiotics, painkillers, and diabetes drugs. The EU Commissioner of Health said that the European Medical Authority has already looked into this issue and emphasized that there are currently no shortages, and said that the Commission was ready to launch a joint procurement plan to purchase medical equipment. The other issue of concern for some is around the free movement of people. Health is considered a national competency, so each member state decides whether to impose travel restrictions. Germany's health minister said there's little point in doing this and a more coordinated approach is needed. But go ahead and take a listen to what the Croatian health minister had to say when asked about whether the EU could close the Schengen travel area.
The situation needs to be monitored on an hourly basis. Of course, if epidemiologically it escalates, we shall undertake other actions. If that means the closing of borders, we shall discuss it, and in line with the national legislation, we shall bring the appropriate response.
That is a remote possibility. What's more pressing is the economy. The EU Commission released its winter forecast on Thursday and identified COVID-19 as a key downside risk for the bloc's growth prospects. It left its growth outlook for the year unchanged at 1.2%, but that's based on the expectation that the outbreak peaks in the first quarter of this year with relatively little global spillover. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Well, unsurprisingly, the coronavirus epidemic has been an issue of great concern to Chinese living overseas. Dong Gang, the head of the Huaxing art troupe in Cape Town, has praised the Chinese government's immediate response to the epidemic. He's added that those living in the diaspora are convinced that under the leadership of the Chinese government, China will surely achieve the ultimate victory in the fight against the coronavirus.
自从这个新冠病毒爆发之后呢，作为生活在海外的华人华侨呢，我们也
The Chinese community in South Africa has been paying attention to this matter since the novel coronavirus outbreak began. We feel that the Chinese government has taken very powerful and effective measures when dealing with the issues concerning the epidemic, whether it's in the form of closing the city in time or changing senior officials at the municipal and provincial committees at critical moments. All this show the determination of the Chinese government in tackling the epidemic and their strong management capabilities.
The Center for China Studies in Nigeria has held a dialogue session to discuss how China and Nigeria should strengthen cooperation in the face of health emergencies. Nigerian government officials, academics, and media representatives attended the event. And in response to the current outbreak of the new coronavirus, the Chinese ambassador to Nigeria, Zhao Pingjian, has said that China is taking thorough preventative and control measures to ensure the safety and physical health of the Chinese people. Zhou said that China has made a positive contribution to global public health. There are currently no cases of coronavirus in Nigeria. Participants of the event say they learned a lot, especially about China's efforts to prevent and control the epidemic.
China's experience in managing an emergency of this magnitude also strengthens us, gives us a better understanding of when emergencies strike, what nations should do. So we felt China has led from the front in managing health emergency. And today we share experience, today we share perspective on how we should also put ourselves together in managing this kind of emergencies, following the footsteps of China in bringing it to here.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Malawian protesters demand an overhaul of the Electoral Commission. And we update you on the latest efforts to fight Ebola in the DRC.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
To Malawi now, where protesters have taken to the streets of the capital Lilongwe, calling for an overhaul of the country's electoral commission. The protesters sealed the offices to the country's electoral body, demanding that Jane Ansah, the chairwoman of Malawi's electoral commission, step down. This latest demonstration comes amid a ruling by the country's top court that overturned last year's presidential election, citing widespread, systematic and grave irregularities.
We are shutting down make offices as a symbol that we are firing Jane Ansah and her team so that new commissioners should come and start preparing for elections.
As a peace-loving Malawian, I have decided to participate in these demonstrations because I believe that this country is for us all and not for a few greedy individuals.
And to South Africa now, where pro-Zuma allies are decrying an arrest warrant issued against the former president, Jacob Zuma. The warrant of arrest was issued after Zuma's legal team produced a sick note claiming that he was too sick to attend a court hearing. Zuma was due to once again appear in court for his ongoing corruption case. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
Former President Jacob Zuma's corruption case has been on and off for 15 years now. Zuma is facing criminal charges relating to numerous alleged acts of fraud and corruption committed during the so-called procurement of arms deal of the 1990s. His case has suffered delays for years. This time, he produced a sick note citing sickness for his absence in court for his court case. A sick note that the judge deemed inadmissible. South Africa's National Prosecuting Authority has over time argued that Zuma's legal team has used every conceivable trick in the book to ensure that the case is delayed and that the sick note is merely the latest excuse. But Zuma has always maintained that the corruption trial against him is a politically motivated witch hunt, and his supporters agree. Zuma's loyalists, comprising sections of the ANC Women and Youth Leagues, the Umkhonto weSizwe Military Veterans Association, and some provincial structures, are planning a fight back against what they regard as the persecution of Zuma.
The total incongruity of the decision of the judge to issue a warrant of arrest against a 77-year-old statesman, 77-year-old statesman, who for 15 years attended every appearance that he had to make in front of the court and respected the court in every possible way. There is no chance of President Zuma being a flight risk. There is no chance of President Zuma not respecting the courts. He was one of the negotiators of our constitution. He is one of the people that made our constitution possible. Why would he undermine that constitution?
These Zuma loyalists say the recent warrant of arrest issued for him by the High Court in Pietermaritzburg is a clear indication that he's being vilified.
This judiciary, even though we respect the independence of judiciary, but the judiciary is a representation of the masses of our people. This judiciary must represent our aspirations of a free and just society. If the judges that are supposed to respect the same constitution are doing otherwise, we shall remove them.
Zuma's supporters have vowed to gather in their thousands outside of the Pietermaritzburg court to show him support at his next court appearance. They will also announce other actions in support of the former president in due course. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's go to South Sudan now, where government and opposition forces are reporting to training centers as the country seeks to unify its armed forces in efforts to restore peace. But the country's peace monitoring body says the process is behind schedule and that the troops face a number of challenges, including a lack of adequate food and supplies. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
This training is meant to unify the various armed forces that have been fighting each other in South Sudan. Sarah Makwach is one of the opposition forces in this training camp known as Rajaf, located 16 kilometers from the capital Juba. Sarah is a mother of 3. She reported to the camp with all her children. Sarah's husband was a soldier too, but he died during the 5-year civil war. She says there is not enough food, accommodation and medical supplies.
Sometimes the rain can rain and we just outside here because there is no place enough to, for us to go and sleep in. We are sleeping outside here. Even the rain, if it has rain, we are just outside here. You find us when we are just, all of us, we are sitting here, no sleeping.
Officials here say there are more than 680 female soldiers in these quarters alone, competing for resources such as water. However, the military says there are warehouses in Juba full of items meant for sites like this, but getting those items here is a challenge.
What we have in stores here is very bulk, very big. What we are lacking only is transportation of these items to the training centers.
South Sudan's Joint Military Ceasefire Commission says at least 10,000 soldiers are now in the camp for training. The parties say they aim to gather fighters into military camps with a view to forming 83,000 strong unified army as a cornerstone of a September 2018 peace deal. But some soldiers are reportedly leaving the training camps.
It's a little bit hard because leaving the children behind, coming for the training, and then going back after some hours to go and see the children, this is a little bit hard on them. We have also pregnant ladies. And with pregnant ladies, you cannot come and make them to stand. Like these people, they are standing now for almost 2 hours. A pregnant lady cannot stand for 2 hours.
With just over a week to the scheduled formation of the new government, the target of completing training of the joint forces and redeploying them seems like an impossible task for troops like Sarah Makwach. That means more time at the training center and more challenges to overcome. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Let's now head up north to Tunisia, where the country's Prime Minister-designate, Eliès Fakhfakh, has failed to get approval from the cabinet and the ruling Ennahda Islamic movement, together with its secular allies. As CGTN's Adnan Chouachi reports, analysts say the current deadlock could have far-reaching political consequences for the nation.
The ruling parliamentary blocs assert that Eliès Fakhfakh has not been able to build consensus yet. Another movement could vote in favor of the Fakhfakh government without taking part in it, in case the cabinet team is not formed according to the representativeness of the parties in the House of the People's Representatives.
We call for the formation of a government of national unity that will include all parties except those who've excluded themselves. This is the first condition to guarantee the success of the new Premier's cabinet. Otherwise, we'll determine our final decision whether to support or oppose the government's formation.
Qalb Tunis is the second political power in the country. Led by the businessman Nabil Al-Qarwi, the party requested Eliès Fakhfakh to expand the political base of his government team before the confidence vote next week.
We will not be part of this government. The Prime Minister designate is not a consensual figure. We are not responsible for any consequences if the government does not gain the confidence of the absolute majority at Parliament.
Analysts maintain that the current deadlock is a political maneuver because MPs are only putting pressure on the Prime Minister designate, but they will not risk losing their seats at Parliament.
The Prime Minister designates cabinet could be granted confidence before being removed from power with a motion of no confidence within 2 to 3 months to be replaced with a new candidate who will be chosen to the ruling parliamentary blocks instead of being the isolated candidate of the president.
Observers believe that Ennahda party and some of its allies will vote for Ilyas al-Fakhfakh cabinet in the last minute. In fact, failure to win parliamentary approval would force the country's president to dissolve the House of the People's Representatives and call for a fresh election. The President of the Republic has urged the current government to ensure the proper functioning of the public service until the new government takes office. Prime Minister-designate Ilyas al-Fakhfakh will present to President Kais Saied the final outcome of the government formation consultations on Friday evening. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
The WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has arrived in the Democratic Republic of Congo. His trip comes a day after the UN agency extended by another 3 months the international public health emergency for the Ebola outbreak in the country. Now, the World Health Organization's Emergency Committee met with the body's Director General to discuss the Ebola outbreak. DRC has been struggling to contain the world's second largest epidemic. At least 2,200 people have died from the disease.
The Emergency Committee on Ebola has advised that the outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to be a public health emergency of international concern, and I have accepted that advice. As I said yesterday, as long as there is a single case of Ebola in an area as insecure and unstable as Eastern DRC, the potential remains for a much larger epidemic.
We were very pleased about substantial progress in the 2 provinces in which that outbreak has happened. And really, the staff active in the field, be they Congo nationals or foreigners, need to be commended on this tremendous progress. And additionally, I see 2 dark clouds on the horizon there. And one is the continued aggressions which happen and which compromise the action of the health teams. And the second one is, and here I'm building a bridge to that global solidarity which you mentioned, that is truly lacking, and it is absolutely paramount that more support is being offered.
Well, let's go live now to Kinshasa, where CGTN correspondent Chris Ochamringa is following the WHO Director General's visit. Chris, just tell us what is the latest on the ground, firstly, as far as the public health emergency status of Ebola is concerned, and generally speaking, people's expectations with regards to the WHO Director General's visit.
Well, I spoke to the health minister yesterday, and he said they have accepted this decision of extending the public health emergency status of the Ebola outbreak. They believe it's a well-intentioned decision that is aimed at stopping the spread of this disease, especially to neighboring countries. The health experts said the risk of it spreading across the international community is very low, but it's still very high in the region because of insecurity. Now, when the WHO initially declared this outbreak a public health emergency of international concern in July last year, the DRC government was very disappointed with that decision, largely because they were fearing the negative consequences that would arise from this decision, namely the trade and travel restrictions that countries would impose on the DRC. But many countries surrounding the DRC heeded the advice.
Unfortunately, it seems we have lost Chris Ochamringa there, joining us, of course, from Kinshasa on the latest on that Ebola outbreak. For now, though, let's turn to the latest in the world of business. Coming up, Uganda's central bank keeps the key lending rate at 9%. And Nigeria introduces longer-term Naira contracts to shore up foreign inflows.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Bank of Uganda has maintained the key benchmark lending rate at 9%. The central bank says the policy decision is necessary to support economic growth, which is likely to be affected by the recent outbreak of coronavirus in China and an invasion of desert locusts in the East Africa region. CGTN's Michael Baleke has more.
Uganda's central bank says although economic growth prospects remain positive, the outbreak of the coronavirus may affect the growth outlook.
There is considerable uncertainty regarding the duration and severity of the coronavirus outbreak. If it persists for an extended period, the effect on global economic activity is likely to be larger than currently projected.
The central bank says the immediate effect of the coronavirus on Uganda will be through imports. 25% of the country's imports come from China, and many of these imports are raw materials and capital goods.
If you don't import capital and raw materials, how do you then end up producing? So either it automatically means that retail supply of goods that will come through will be expensive, and therefore the cost of production will be high. Alternatively, if you're importing consumer goods, they require to be high, the price will be high.
Preliminary estimates from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics indicate that this financial year, Uganda's economy will grow in a range of 5.5 to 6%. Public infrastructure investments such as electricity, coupled with improved agricultural performance, will also contribute to economic progress. On the domestic scene, Bank of Uganda says constraints to agricultural production, including uncertain weather patterns and the current invasion of the desert locusts, could also weigh in on economic activity. The locusts have plagued several countries since the start of the year, including Somalia, Ethiopia, Yemen, and Kenya, and have crossed the border into Uganda. The UN has warned of possible high levels of acute food insecurity, with millions of people requiring food assistance.
That has now a knock-on effect on people's ability to pay back loans. That has an effect on people's ability to invest or to engage in other productive activities.
But despite the global and domestic risks, the Bank of Uganda says the next 2 to 3 years, Uganda's economy is expected to grow at an average of 6.3%, supported by lower lending rates from the central bank. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Sudan's annual inflation rate hit 64.28% in January from 57% in December, driven by rising food prices. The State Statistics Agency has said the country's economy was hit hard when the south of the country seceded back in 2011. This costed 3/4 of its oil output, a crucial source of foreign currency. Inflation has soared in recent years, and that's been driven by food, beverages, and a black market for US dollars. Shortages of bread and fuel, both subsidized by the government, coupled with hefty price rises, sparked protests that led to the ousting of then-President Omar al-Bashir last April. Nigeria's central bank has introduced longer-term contracts on the naira in a move to attract more foreign inflows, shore up its dwindling dollar reserves, and stave off a currency devaluation. The central bank offered naira futures contracts for a 5-year settlement for the first time, priced at 379.81 naira to the US dollar. The longest tenure prior to this was a 13-month contract, which the central bank offered for more than a year. The bank operates a multiple exchange rate regime that it uses to manage pressure on the naira. The naira has come under pressure this year as importers demand dollars to feed Nigeria's consumers and as market sentiment worsens by fears that the coronavirus outbreak could hit Chinese demand. Now, South Africa's Labour Court has dismissed an application by 2 trade unions over planned job cuts at the embattled South African Airways. Analysts say the layoffs will be key to reviving the fortunes of SAA, which is fighting for survival after being placed under a form of bankruptcy protection in December. But unions say specialists appointed to try to rescue SAA are attempting to push through the job cuts without following the country's labour laws. Well, let's bring you more details on this. We're now joined from Johannesburg by CGTN's Sumitra Naidu. Sumitra, of course, as we know now, unions were not successful in that court application, but of course still complaining that SAA is trying to push through these job cuts without following the letter of the law. Can you expand on what rules should be followed according to the law?
Well, you know, when it comes to retrenchments and any job cuts, as per the Labour Relations Act, consultation is the most important factor. Now, as per Section 189 of the Labour Relations Act, employers have to give 60 days notice of their intention to retrench. That doesn't mean the actual retrenchment will happen in 60 days. The notice serves as communication that this may be the case going forward. It is coming. Now, as per the law, Section 213, the employer has to approve operational requirements, that a genuine operational requirement existed for this decision. So the employer cannot merely claim that it's not making money and therefore the business has to let go of staff to reduce costs. Furthermore, employers cannot pick and choose who they want to cut. It's about fairness. You know, this is where the last in, first out rule applies. Or again, employers need to prove why certain individuals can be removed, maybe a non-critical function in the business. They can't just decide to retrench you because they don't like you, or they feel that you're lazy, or that you know too much. You know, that could also be the case. Now, what has happened in this case specifically, no consultation was had around retrenchments because the business rescue practitioner is saying there isn't anything happening at this stage. So even though they did warn it might be a possibility, the unions went to court saying they have evidence that it is happening. Now, apparently SAA managers are telling staff not to return to work at the end of February, but they didn't put that forward, and the business rescue practitioner said, we didn't consult because there isn't anything to consult on at this stage, and this is why the court dismissed the application.
So as you say, the business rescue practitioner is saying nothing is happening at this stage, but should they go ahead with job cuts, how many people stand to lose their jobs as a result of this rescue plan?
Well, there are people across this business. Again, we have no confirmation of that. This is what the unions have, but there's been no statement from the business rescue practitioner or from SAA on any retrenchments at this stage. So I think, I think it's important as well to understand how the business rescue process works. A business rescue practitioner is agreed to and appointed by the court in the same way he or she must be removed by the court. A company can only file for business rescue if they can prove that it is financially distressed. Now, the business rescue practitioner has considerable powers, essentially equating to full management and control of the company. So he or she can make management decisions and delegate functions, and the practitioner has control over removing people from positions. The aim of the business rescue process ultimately is to come up with a plan to save the business. If this can't be done, he or she again needs to also be forthcoming with that information.
And so what other measures, Sumitra, are likely to be considered as part of this business rescue plan, apart from these potential job cuts?
Okay, so we don't have full details because the plan hasn't been made public yet. It's expected next week, but we do know that the plan is one to save the airline. So, this plan is essential in a business rescue process. Once appointed, the practitioner has 10 days to come up with a plan. That plan will say whether the business needs to be liquidated or whether it can be saved. So there was a delay. Actually, the business rescue practitioner asked for extra time in order to make that plan available. That plan is expected next week. So we know that they are trying to save the airline. The plan calls for 4 billion rand. 2 billion rand was called for from private investors and the other 2 billion from government. They got the 2 billion rand from the private sector and was struggling on the government side. But that money essentially will be used to settle debts, pay fees. The airline also still needs to remain operational. It needs money for day-to-day expenses. But in terms of the long-term sustainability of the airline, we'll have to see what kind of magic they come up with for SAA when that plan is revealed.
Yeah, that will be very interesting indeed to see how that plan is rolled out. Thank you so much, Sumitra Naidu, joining us there live from Johannesburg. Now, staying in South Africa, another company, of course, that is struggling. Trade unions are at odds over a plan to use pension funds to help rescue Eskom. Eskom is struggling financially and operationally on the back of rising debt and a string of supply issues. Last week, COSATU, one of the country's largest labor unions, proposed that the government employees' pension fund, which is managed by the Public Investment Corporation, be used to keep the electricity utility afloat. But other unions are against that move. Once more from Johannesburg, here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu.
Many thought the proposal was far-fetched until the president said he would consider it. Now that the matter is receiving serious attention, some unions are worried it may go ahead at the cost of millions of dollars that belong to employees.
The president does not actually have powers to approve it because the money that of public servants is held by the PIC, and the PIC will get the mandate from GPF on how they should do the investments. We already wrote to GPF, warned the chairperson of GPF to say that they must be careful how they're going to deal with this situation. Because if they are going to make a mistake and approve the utilization of the pension money in paying Eskom debt and there are no returns, those board members or trustees of GPF, we are going to take them one by one to court.
The PSA, which represents close to 250,000 workers, says it won't allow it. The Solidarity Union, with over 200,000 members, is also threatening legal action.
This call was made by COSATU, BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, say we support COSATU call. But they are not saying what are they bringing. It's because they know the money goes there in Eskom, it will not come back.
But COSATU believes using this money to save Eskom is in the interest of the entire nation.
If Eskom goes down, the whole economy will follow suit, and government will not be immune. The private sector will not be immune. Workers will pay the highest price. So ours is that let us agree that we are going to have this target of 250 billion. Then later on, once we have a principal agreement, then we can sit down and look at how do we divide that amongst all of the role players.
COSATU is proposing that $17 billion of government pension money be used to help shore up some of Eskom's debt. The debt equity swap will give workers shares in the power utility. The concern, though, is that Eskom has been mismanaged for so long and still needs a further $15 billion before it stabilizes financially. Will workers ever see a decent return, if any, on this investment? Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, that is where we leave your business news, but here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, a Nigerian sculptor turns discarded tires into works of art.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In Nigeria, a sculptor has found a meeting point between art and waste management. Ernest Nkwacha is transforming discarded and used tires, which litter the streets of Lagos, into amazing works of art. CGTN's Deji Badmos has more.
This has become something of a routine for Ernest Nkwacha. Every now and then, he goes around the streets in his community, picking up discarded used tires. The tires may have outlived their original usefulness, but they're just about to take a different form and assume a new life. This is where Nkwacha brings all the tires he's been collecting from the streets. It's his workshop where the tires are completely transformed into amazing wild animal sculptures. He first conceives an idea of the animal he would like to construct, makes a sketch of it, constructs a metal frame of the animal, and then screws cut-out tires onto the metal frame as the flesh to complete the piece. It's a lot of hard work and could take months to complete one sculpture, but the finished product is always outstanding and worth the effort.
The use of this tire, because people see it as waste material. You know, they use it like, you know, people see that, okay, like using it as a jungle justice. You know, when somebody commit crime, use it to burn down a criminal and other things which they see it as. But now I'm trying to paint this picture and make them see the reason that, look, we cannot keep on seeing this thing as a tool of, you know, or a material of jungle justice, or seeing it as a way of discarding it on the environment, polluting the environment. But how can we see it as raw material in this case and put it into practice, you know, and so doing, you are creating employment.
For about a decade now, Nkwacha has been transforming discarded used tires into impressive works of art. His unique and unconventional art is also helping in its small way to address the waste management challenge in Lagos, a city which generates over 15,000 tons of waste daily.
Ever since I've started, presently now, I've made the public to understand that this is no longer waste material, but rather raw material. So now I find some of the challenges I get now from there is I hardly see this material on the street. You understand? I hardly see them to pick, which at least I know I'm educating them, which they are now seeing it as a useful raw material, no longer them seeing it as that waste usage and discard along the road.
When Nkwacha started out in this line of art, he says he faced criticism because many couldn't see discarded used tires beyond trash.
Sometimes the frustration getting this work done, maybe when you're trying to get it right and it's not you know, it's not coming through, it's not forthcoming. So I just need to sit back and have a rethink, deep thought about what you are doing. You understand? And you know, not everybody will appreciate what you are doing. I also have people that tell me, man, I don't really appreciate your art, but that doesn't stop me from doing it. You understand? Because I still have a lot of people that appreciate what I'm doing, because I feel my art is not for everybody.
Nkwacha's works have since gained popularity even beyond Nigeria. Today, his works are exhibited in major galleries across the country, like the popular Nike Art Gallery in Lagos, where his works are prominently displayed. He also sells to foreign clients as well.
I feel fulfilled. You know, so I feel happy, and I feel, you know, people appreciate what I'm doing, and I feel happy.
Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
The latest from the world of sport coming up next. Zamalek and Esperance put the final touches on their preparations for the CAF Super Cup.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sportsy